Hey Channel Insiders, welcome back for part 2 of our first ever bonus episode. I'm your host Katie Bavoso, and if you haven't watched or listened to part 1 of my interview with Cody Kretsinger, go back and do that right now. You can listen on your preferred podcast platform, watch on YouTube, or better yet, watch on channelinsider.com. Today in part 2 of my interview with Cody, we continue to talk about the 2024 threat landscape, and we discuss how channel solution providers can better secure themselves and their clients, as well as use this as a business opportunity to expand their portfolio and their client base. Can you walk me through what exactly the timeline is on average for ransomware? How long will it be until you realize a ransomware has come into my system? And is it that you're recognizing it right away, or does it take a while?
That is a difficult question to answer, but let's start with what most organizations have, and that is okay cybersecurity hygiene. So when you have okay cybersecurity hygiene, you have okay security tools, which means you have okay policies and procedures, which means everything's just okay. So when you have just okay everything, it can take some time in order to not only detect this, but also see what's going on and maybe who it was from. And what I mean by that is threat actors typically want somebody to click a link, or they want somebody to go to a website or enter credentials or scan a QR code with their phone to bypass security controls, any number of things. They're going to probably focus on an individual or individuals as opposed to systems, as humans are a little easier sometimes to target than network devices. But
what? We're not perfect? Are you kidding me?
I know, right? We'll get to that a little bit later. So once they've managed to establish a beachhead or a foothold, they're going to move laterally through the network. And all that, that's a fancy industry term for basically being able to move around the network. And they're going to figure out what information that organization has. Specifically, they're going to try to find anything valuable. And once they figure out that information, they're going to extract it so that they have a copy of it. And on their way out the door, they're going to deploy ransomware. Sometimes the bad guys have access for several days. Sometimes it's several weeks. As the CISA report said, Volt Typhoon had access for 5 years, and that was one or more organizations for 5 or more years, I think, is what I was reading between the lines on. The biggest thing is the more noise they make, the more likely they are to be detected. And when you have okay tools, you're not going to see the noise until it gets pretty significant. And that's usually when ransomware is deployed. So that's their last step before they exit the network. If that is the point in which you're aware that the bad guys are there, that means they've already done all of the damage so far and will continue to do damage, because that'll lead to either double or triple extortion, depending on the threat group.
And just to give an idea of like what we're talking about with the payloads that we're looking at, NBC News did report that last year, ransomware attacks on U.S. healthcare networks, that equated to paying a record $1 billion just in that sector, in that vertical specifically. So we're not talking small chunks of change. They're going after a lot of money. So with that said, Cody, you mentioned zero trust already, but what else do we need in our systems today? And when for the MSPs, the MSSPs listening to this, what does the opposite of okay look like as far as what our stacks need to look like?
So there's no perfect stack. That's going to be number one. The biggest thing is being able to monitor and respond to things as they happen. Oftentimes, this will be with EDR, XDR, MDR, whatever you want to call it. Those particular products are going to give some visibility into things. And then kind of the flip side of that is you need to have all of the data from audit logs and behavioral analysis and silliness like that. That generally is collected through a SIM product. And when you bolt those two things together, oftentimes you've got some pretty good visibility. So at a bare minimum, that would be kind of, if I was building a stack, I would definitely have those two components in. There's also a number of different things out there in terms of monitoring network traffic back and forth and seeing whether if that's malicious in some way. There are, DNS options out there to detect malicious activity. There's all sorts of different security tools outside of that. Password managers. I mean, the list can go on and on and on. But I think it's really important to note in terms of when it comes to security is you've got to make sure that you're covering all your bases. And what I mean by that is you have to be able to validate whether or not your tools are working and if whether or not the bad guys are getting in. So having a independent third party, make sure that you are doing the things that you say you are doing, or you are providing that stuff to your clients, is incredibly helpful.
Do you ever see, or have you seen, a managed service provider or even one of their customers neglecting? Like, is there an often neglected area of their security stack that you would tell them, you really have to pay attention to this?
Yeah, actually, the audit logging is probably one of the first things that I double check with a lot of our partners at Galactic. So by default, and this is a Microsoft default, audit logging is not enabled on many of their products. And that may come as a surprise to some people because M365 audit logs are incredibly important post-incident. And if they're not turned on, then you're not going to get any data, which means you don't know whether or not they actually exfiltrated any information. So that would probably be the first thing that I would do. Because I built a SOC, I hinge absolutely everything on a good SIM platform. There are tons of really good SIM products out there and tons of really good managed SOCs that can actually monitor the SIM solution for you as well. That way you don't even have to be the one doing all the nerdy stuff and with the dials and the knobs and the alerts and the silliness. They'll reach out to you when something actually happens, which is, for busy MSP owners, that is exactly what they need.
You said a name in there, and I want to turn around and talk about it. Microsoft. Microsoft just launched Copilot. And there is some concern there that you and I had spoke about as far as like what it is and what we need to do to make sure that we're using it to the best of our abilities and still being safe. Can you talk to me just around some of the best practices in using it?
So in M365, there is something called data classification, and essentially it's part of the DLP component of M365. It's a fancy way of basically saying being able to control who has access to what documents, if they can leave the environment, that kind of stuff, right? So that component has to be enabled, and then sensitivity labels have to be applied to every single document and email in the entire organization in SharePoint on OneDrive. And if that isn't done, then Copilot can essentially do whatever it wants with any of the data that is in any of those documents, emails, team messages, so on and so forth. It can do whatever you want it to. And frankly, I know it's a learning model that might be just for your tenant, but I wouldn't trust that that's going to be widely the case for the entire time that Copilot exists. At some point, some of that metadata has got to make its way out, and at some point, that is going to then train other AI models. I am all for AI in particular ways. Having carte blanche on an entire organization's documents, regardless of sensitivity, that's scary. So I've talked to a number of MSPs recently, specifically around this particular component, and this is the first thing that I say is sensitivity labels on? And if so, then we can go to the next step. But that is where most people are going to say, nope, too much work. It's going to cost too much to deploy. It ain't worth it. To be fair, you can go and enable it without the sensitivity labels, but basically that means who knows what information is going to show up at what time when you're calling on that language model to generate something for you. Too much of a question mark for me, so I'm going to pump the brakes there.
When it comes to working with artificial intelligence tools, even from your basic level of ChatGPT all the way up to using something like Microsoft Copilot or Gemini or any of these things that we're hearing about coming out from the large hyperscalers, are there any other safety measures, any other notes, any other maybe just don'ts that you would tell people to apply in their day-to-day?
I think the basic that anything that you give to these providers could potentially be disseminated is enough for me to warrant a little bit of worry, at least on my side. I think that there's a lot of real risk in putting in data that you're not okay with others seeing, at least from my perspective. But at the same time, I'm enthusiastically cautious. And I use those words in that way because I think in cybersecurity, there's a lot of possibilities in terms of us being able to leverage AI to better protect people and to find things faster and to stop things. But the more that we do that, the more that type of system has control over very critical things. It's almost like, it's almost like Terminator. It's almost like the, what's the Terminator thing called?
He says, "I'll be back."
Oh, well, yeah, but there's Skynet. Goodness, I couldn't think of Skynet while talking about AI. It edges, not to say Skynet's going to take everything over. It is. But at some point, it edges us pretty close to that. And it's going to be challenging, I think, in the next several years to see where the delineation is, where we do want AI to help us and where we want to protect whatever it may be.
Let's talk specifically about the solution providers. What are the questions that you should be prepared to answer if you want to be able to call yourself a trusted advisor?
Yeah, it's kind of two components there. The first one is being able to identify risk, and the second component there is to be able to communicate risk. Every organization is going to have different risks. There are going to be some shared risks. So let's imagine for a moment you have two clients. You know some of the users are reusing passwords. Okay, that is a shared risk. That is a common risk. But you need to be able to talk about it in such a way that it's a risk to the business, not a risk to the end user, not a risk to the data, but the risk to the organization. When we're communicating a risk back to business owners, we have to do it in such a way that they understand what we're talking about. One of my former coworkers, I love him to death, is as nerdy can be. He is straight up Mr. Geek, right? And I am too, really. But he brought a 50-page report to a quarterly business review and started going over all of this other data and metrics that we are judged on internally, but frankly, the client doesn't care about. They want to hear information that they then can take and help their business proceed. So we have to educate them in ways where they not only understand the data, but it's presented in a way where they can leverage that data. Oftentimes as nerds, we get it really, really close, but we don't share a story or share something that will relate it back to that individual. When you have that talk with that client, they're much more apt to remember the story and say, "Oh, crap, we've got to make these changes because if we don't, then this could happen to us."
So, Cody, considering that we've spoken a lot about the new threats this year, the new targets or the growing number of targets in, for example, the healthcare space, we should also be looking at this, I would say, as a business case for how solution providers could expand the number of organizations or type of organizations that they approach about offering their services. Is there anything that you can tell me about where they should start?
I think at a bare minimum, what these events, these cyber events do is continuously refresh most people's memories in terms of what's going on out there on like the bad guys side of things. And what I mean by that is when it comes to cybersecurity events, it's almost a selling opportunity. And I'm not saying ambulance chase here. I'm not saying like go to the person that's just been breached and say, "Hey, I can do security better." That's certainly not what I'm saying. But
that will not open any doors for you, by the way.
No, it won't. Not at all. What it is a learning opportunity, right? So for existing clients that are tangentially or directly related to whoever has been breached, right? Especially if they're local. A good example would be, Chicago-based clients. Hey, a Chicago-based, hospital recently got compromised. Let's start to look and analyze your security to see whether or not you would be susceptible to this kind of same style of attack. again, that'll work for prospects, that'll work with current clients, because it gets the kind of the gears turning in terms of what would happen during that event. I'll follow that under number one. Number two is your clients inevitably are going to have a breach at some point. There will be an incident. It's almost like death, taxes, and incidents. Like it's something is going to happen. And that can be something small like an email compromise, or it can be something very, very large like a large-scale ransomware deployment, heaven forbid. But preparing clients for that inevitability would be a really good project as well. One of the other things that an MSP can do here is when something does kick off, being that advisor during an incident. So oftentimes if there's like cyber liability insurance, they're going to call the IR team. They're going to be handling the incident and stuff like that. But the thing is, most of the time during incidents, the checkbook comes out. And I'm not saying try to get them to buy all sorts of stuff that they don't need. But what I am saying is it's a really good time to be able to talk about all of those challenges that maybe security-wise that they didn't buy at a particular time. And then I would say number three, incident response policies, acceptable use policies, things along those lines, the administrative side of things, not the technical controls, but the administrative controls to help limit some of that is going to be incredibly important as well. We're seeing more and more organizations align to a compliance framework, or we're seeing more MSPs leverage a compliance framework to standardize all of their clients towards. So having all of those three would be great. Maybe just focusing on one in the first couple of quarters might be a little bit helpful too.
Cody, this has been such a fun conversation, and I'm so excited about everything that is going to happen in 2024 and being back here at the end of the year, I would say, to discuss. But I really also want to make sure that I give you an opportunity to talk about Galactic Advisors and all the things that you're involved in.
You know, I've talked about having an independent third party come in and validate whether or not you're doing the things you say you're doing. And that is the easiest way for you to become one of our partners. We want to check to see whether or not your tools will catch the bad guys. And you might be surprised, because the majority of the time we're able to bypass things like EDR, XDR, MDR, all of those DRs, and walk a network and get some really, really interesting data. We'll even crack some passwords. So that's where it begins. And then the next step is helping you get to that vCISO level, that trusted advisor level, through not only as compliance as a service, but also building your security stack and then being able to educate and talk about risk. Really what we're trying to do is help protect 1 million people. And by helping MSPs do that, that helps our mission. I got to do one more plug here. I am one of the executive directors for the Illinois Cyber Foundation. That's illinoiscyberfoundation.org. We are all about educating youth, all about educating the older folks who might not understand some of the scams, and educating cybersecurity professionals on what is going on. If you just so happen to be in Illinois, or know somebody who's in Illinois and would like to get involved, we would be more than happy to have you on board. We do a B-Sides Peoria in Peoria, Illinois, every single year. Myself and Nick are expanding our program in 2024 for a lot of other kind of crazy stuff. We've got some really cool stuff in store there. So if you're interested, please hop by illinoiscyberfoundation.org.
And Cody, if we want to get in touch with you, if we have questions, if we just want to reach out to you, where can we find you and how can we reach you?
Yeah, easiest way is going to be find me on LinkedIn. It'll be Cody Kretsinger.
Thanks again to my guest, Cody Kretsinger, for coming on the show, and thank you for watching or listening to our first bonus episode. If you want more episodes of Channel Insider Partner POV, you can watch on channelinsider.com or YouTube at channelinsider_news and trends. You can also listen to our podcast on your preferred podcast platform. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe wherever possible so you never miss an episode. We've got another new episode of Channel Insider Partner POV coming out this Thursday, so I'll see you then. I'm Katie Bavoso. See you next time.